Hi, Per.
Hi,
Hi, Per. How are you keeping?
very well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, all good this end as well. Thanks very much for asking. Thanks for joining us today on our podcast series, Conversations with Coopman. It's certainly a pleasure to, I think, have the opportunity to talk with you about our topic today, which is centered around the sustainable revolution and I suppose what impact the finance world is going to have on our future. I know from our conversations over the last few months, you've certainly been involved in some very exciting projects and come with a very worldview aspect on kind of what's happening in the sustainable finance world. So I've given the audience a bit of an introduction into your background, Per, but perhaps you can tell us a little bit of an overview of your experience in sustainable financing.
Sure. I've been working within the sustainability and sort of renewable energy field of financing and investing since around 2008. It started with an assignment with a Belgian family office who wanted to sell three quite significant brownfield renewable energy assets in the Baltics. And as this concluded, an increasing amount of my focus was turned toward renewable energy, the European CO2 market development, and subsequently then the sustainable solutions in that field. In amongst other aspects, I've been working on the full range of renewable energy asset financing and investing, from construction financing to utility scale assets in Europe and Africa to smaller, sort of socially responsible driven projects in Bangladesh to ecologically integrated renewable energy projects in the foothills of northern Italy. So it's very diverse. But in the last 3 years, an increasing focus of mine has been on investing and subsequently funding technology solutions, which has the potential to, in my view, to significantly move the dial in respect of emission reduction and the circular economy. Areas such as converting plastic waste on an industrial scale to low sulfur bunker. This is the fuel that the large ships runs on. To recycling car batteries, community power solution, and energy storage.
Wow, Perry, it's Mark here. Geez, that sounds like a incredibly interesting career you've had so far, and very, very interesting stuff. So obviously, from what you're saying so far, it's so broad the topic of sustainability. Like from your perception, and what do you think the definition of sustainability actually is?
Hmm. I think this can be debated. Sustainability for me means efficiency. Efficiency, which goes beyond tweaking models and operational approaches. An example of that would be the sort of just-in-time manufacturing model. It does bring about efficiencies, but it brings about them in a way that strips the system of its robustness and creates complex chains of interdependencies. So these interdependencies, which obviously have been proven fragile and put under pressure, such as what we experience right now. So sustainability is more like we talk about sustainable business models, society, and then that extends to the global spectrum. So it goes on every level of how we operate businesses, society, transportation. Well, it really touches every aspect of life as we know it. So although it's a monumental task to reconfigure all these aspects, I mean, if you look at sustainability as a whole, as a mission, it also presents a huge opportunity. Because as much as the just-in-time model was created on the basis of increasing efficiencies and subsequently increasing profitability, sustainability done right should have similar effects, whilst allowing for those businesses and organizations who embrace it to gain a significant competitive edge over comparable organizations. So for me, sustainability is the next level up. It's business management 6.0 or whatever level we're at right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned there obviously it's an opportunity for businesses, for the future. So I suppose before you look forward, we probably should look back. Like where have you seen the demand for sustainable financing over the past couple of years?
I think sustainability has been heavily focused on energy. The sort of pillars of energy that's been growing. We're looking at wind and solar predominantly, which went from very alternative investment categories in the 80s and the 90s, even up to the 2000s, has now been really embraced as staple investment opportunities and strategies. So the renewable energy and storage, both in terms of deployment, but also in regards to solution development, has seen a significant increase in demand for finance and investment. The development of these two main sectors has gone from being, just as I said, alternative to becoming mainstream. So that's where the majority of capital flows, as I've seen over the last 5 years. But the fallout of the 2008 credit market also accelerated this because of the interest rate environment being what it is. investors such as pension fund and fixed income investors seeking yields were looking for alternative ways to get that sort of income. And it wasn't making money off of money. It's making money off of producing something that's good, something that's required. And for good reasons. Like having a physical asset which produces income for years to come, in most cases, is particularly good investment because it's not speculative. It's founded in real value, real creation, and a genuine demand for something that's different than what they have available to themselves right now, or at the time when coal and gas were the main contributors to energy production.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right when you talk about, that creation of physical assets as being the opportunity for companies to generate income, improve their profitability. They would have been ideas created at a certain point in time. And I suppose my question is, sustainability used to be seen by many, as more of a risk mitigation exercise, but surely now it can be used as an engine for innovation, which has resulted in previous innovations such as wind and solar. Would you agree?
Well, can it be seen as both? I mean, there are inherent risks associated with the fallout from global warming, and this is the topical thing. From water scarcity, starvation, flooding, and all erosion of biodiversity to displacement of a large amount of people globally. So it's still a significant risk to be considered, and it won't go away. But what has happened is that the best and the brightest of these planets have started focusing on coming up with solutions in light of this threat, which has created the engine that you're referring to, which is quite phenomenal. As someone who's acted as an investor and financier in this area, I think the past 3 years have been particularly interesting with regards to the innovation piece. I mean, the capacity for innovation seems to know no bounds. And I've seen groundbreaking solutions beyond my wildest imagination develop in a very short space of time. So the innovation side is truly alive and kicking, which is one of the reasons why I'm so hopeful for the future, that solutions will present themselves, which will remedy or just sort of reverse the global warming that we're facing. So the only issue I see with this is the commercial viability aspect. I'm a firm believer in that. Well, you can believe in global warming, you cannot. I mean, it's not a religion, really. There are some facts behind it, but choose to believe it or not. The strongest argument for any activity from an investment or financing point of view is profitability. So in order to enable a broad adaptation of new solutions is to ensure that is economically not only viable, but generally attractive. Regulation, as opposed to subsidies, I think is the preferred way to go to drive this sort of adaptation initially. The subsidies we saw in Europe in terms of renewable energy are now practically gone. Everything is market-based, but it took that to accelerate the growth of the sector, the cost of solar panels going down, the increased efficiencies, and so on and so on. So the sector exploded thanks to these subsidies, but they're now gone. It's taken a while. It cost a fair bit of money, but comparable to the referring to the risk aspect of it and the costs of erosion of seaside towns, etc., is all the subsidies will probably account for a tiny percentage comparable if we did nothing. So they do have an important role to play here in order to accelerate the deployment of new solutions in a competitive way. But there are many examples of how this can be achieved by the business community themselves. One particularly interesting example of how innovation can be driven alongside with self-regulatory sort of frameworks is a group in Norway called Norsk Gjenvinning, Norwegian Recycling, for those who don't speak Norwegian. There's a clear example of how someone looked at their sector, looked at efficiencies and what can be done. Now, they transformed themselves from a waste disposal business, like we see here now, on par with everybody else. They're doing the same thing, competing about the same things, small margins, but they took it. They took a very bold decision. You need to have the sort of shareholder buy-in for this, but they changed themselves from a resource business, from a waste disposal business to a resource business in a fairly short space of time. They recognize that the resources are scarce, but also the resources are valuable. And from that point, they transformed their business model, drove regulation of how anti-dumping laws and everything else could be enforced. Things that the local councils here are doing in Ireland, only to, through that drive, and bold approach to their sector became the main player in Norway. There's a really Harvard Business Review done a really good case study on their transformation. If anybody wants to look up, called Norsk Gjenvinning.
How do you spell that? So that's obviously one example of, as you call it, sustainability being innovative whilst operating within the kind of regulatory frameworks. As I alluded to at the start of the call, you've obviously had the opportunity to be involved in a number of projects, and I appreciate you probably can't give away too much details because I imagine some are quite sensitive, but maybe insights into some of the work that's being done, being funded by the finance world at the minute, in Ireland or across Europe. If there's anything along those lines that you could share with us, but that'd be great.
Sure. I think one of the more exciting projects I've been involved with, which ties into this eye-opening experience of what innovation really can do. The project I've been involved with, I've been addressing a range of issues, but one that was particularly a hot topic, has been a hot topic for the last while, is the plastics problem. So the family office I was working with, for those who don't know what a family office is, it's a privately held investment vehicle by one family. So we invest directly, take an initiative. So it's very, very much below the radar. We don't publicize our activities, etc. But this is one I really want to lift to the forefront, because we're looking at the plastics problem. We're looking at a range of solutions that may be able to solve this. And I think we looked at 20, 30 different technologies using a methodology called pyrolysis. It's an old way of doing things. It's heating up materials in an oxygen-free environment and transforming their composition. You can do that with plastic. And the question is there, how do you do it at scale? And do it consistently and get a consistent output. And this method allows for the conversion of plastic waste into bunker oil, which is the fuel for ships and other useful materials like natural gas. What was particularly interesting to this respect was the profitability of the project, which was extraordinary. And that was in part due to the cost of polluting these days. The inability of European countries and Americans to ship plastic waste to China, which has been sort of dirty secret of recycling the last couple of years. So this had to happen on local turf. But the profitability of it was very, very interesting. I mean, extraordinary payback terms. I mean, 2.5 years payback on a 7 million investment. But also in combination then with a significant impact it could have if deployed correctly, right? So there's a very inspirational gentleman called Richard Buckminster Fuller. He was an American inventor, visionary. He said, pollution is nothing but the resources we're not harvesting. We allow them to disperse because we're ignorant of their value, right? So this statement made it abundantly clear to us that we would have to start modeling the financials and operational model in a way that which took into account the scarcity of raw materials, which would be plastic waste. A scenario which I think few would consider today with all the news surrounding the plastic pollution crisis. So with new technologies, we're going to turn these issues into a different issue, a luxury problem, we can call it. And that is a fascinating project. It's ongoing right now, and there's an awful lot of drive in this space. I think, like renewable energy, it's hampered by the same sort of perception that renewable energy had in 2000 or 90s and 2000. It wasn't established. People didn't understand it, didn't understand the models, and therefore financing was very, very slow to show up. The financial systems in Europe right now and everything else, and the abundance of impact and sustainability funds will certainly make this easier. But the understanding, the technological understanding, which, believe me, I have to have very good engineers around me explaining it, like to a 7-year-old. You need that sort of marriage between engineering understanding and financial understanding, and then how society works to be able to capitalize these products effectively. But that's one very, very interesting project, and it's coming along nicely. I've also been involved with impactful renewable energy projects where communities have been sort of revitalized through embedding the energy infrastructure investment deep within the same. So this can lift poverty levels, as this did in this case in South Africa. But it's also created synergies far superseding the initial intended hopes and aspirations of the project team. where it became an integral part of the community and problems were solved by the community on their own accord, simply because they knew how interdependent they were on each other, rather than just planting something in the middle of a rural area, not taking local communities into consideration, but just putting up high fences and flying in expertise, as the oil sector has been doing in Africa for the last donkeys. So that added an awful lot of value. So the community theme is now becoming increasingly topical and important. This is particularly true in an area called community grids and solutions. And this is a field which is accelerating really, really fast. The benefit of these systems is that they allow communities to share energy produced and stored between themselves, which makes the economic benefit for participants much more attractive. It also mitigates the need for significant infrastructure upgrades within the energy transmission system, so ESP. But one of these projects is right on our doorstep in Limerick. I believe the number is around 1.3 billion has been funded by EU. And this is going to be the test bed for how cities will operate in the future, particularly in Europe. So what is developed there is going to be the blueprint for other cities all around Europe. And there's some super innovative companies from Ireland, in particular, spearheading this kind of solution. One of which is like Empower, which is led by a gentleman called Dudley Stewart, and other companies. But these are all coming out of the woodworks right now. And yes, they need this sort of funding from the EU to as a proof of concept. But to fund and to step in on this level now, I think that is one of the more attractive investments that are available out there right now. Because development capital, infrastructure capital, and all that stuff, that's going to be quite easy. Putting belief behind the solutions that are out there now, that is the key play at the moment.
Is there much in terms of, obviously, the innovation piece again? Is there much, and you talk about kind of the energy sharing, but is there innovation sharing amongst the finance community, that if there's an area to deploy capital, are the finance community speaking to each other on the kind of the knowledge sharing to kind of keep driving that?
The finance society is split in many ways, alluding to the idea of having that sort of in-house expertise of engineering coupled with financial engineering and structuring. It's a competitive edge. I don't think many banks or financial institutions would gladly share it, because in truth there is a deficiency of projects, and there's far too much money floating around. So before, when money was scarce to the sectors, now the reverse. High quality projects are snapped up very early, and therefore there's little communication between them. But that's what I see in the large institutional financing place, the bulk word of corporate finance houses and banks. However, what I saw in the family office world, where this is private investments, not too much publicity, it's driving a thematic sort of investment approach rather than monetary at its core. So looking at to excel certain areas where you think this is close to our heart, very personal. Therein lies an awful lot of knowledge sharing. And in part, in the last family office I worked for, a large degree of my time was actually allocated to speak to other families around Europe of how to access this sector, how they can invest safely, what their parameters are, where they could step in and how, and on what terms, and how to mitigate risk, and so on. So from our point of view, that was a very much, let's lift this sector. And that went further than just the monetary investments that we did and the resources we put at play, because it went further than using money, and money is grand, that's fine. But synergies between stakeholders is pivotal to make things work. And because the area of sustainability and such is quite politicized, it needs some strong driving forces behind it. And I think that's why the family office community came together to actually share a lot of this understanding to drive it forward. And there's a lot of stories in that space of wealthy families that really put everything to play in this space. I think one that I want to mention, because I think they're doing a phenomenal job, is the Ugla family, who's behind Maersk, the shipping company. It's not the least polluting thing in the world, but their goals are extraordinarily aggressive to make sure that they do the right thing, that their organization does the right thing. It's a thought leader, and they're allocating a tremendous amount of capital and resources to solving the problems that are inherent to a sector, much like what we seen in Norsk Gjenvinning. In their case, it was a private equity firm. In this case, it's a family-owned business, in part.
You mentioned there that there's there's a deficiency of projects, and you mentioned then that there's a lot of money around. It's probably a bit early from a finance perspective, but have you seen any impact of COVID-19 on sustainable investing?
Sustainable investing is such a broad topic. I mean, if you look at the direct development, I mean, uncertainty always slows things down. Predictability makes it easy. So there's the other end of the scale. But so on the one hand, there's been slowdowns, undoubtedly. In part because of supply chain deficiencies. One part is missing, so the solar farm cannot be built, or similar things. So, but on the other hand, there's been a lot of interesting development within the strategies applied and the collaboration that's been allowed to grow from, well, what we consider this slowdown from a breakneck speed in society. So people have had time to take stock, think about what they're doing, and look around them a little bit rather than just run blindly ahead. And I think what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing is that this has created a much more meatier solutions, thinking about stakeholder alignment and how long-term relationships can really thrive rather than just a quick buck, flip it and go on. I think that's really, really positive. So from a financial point of view, I think the sector has been seeing a slowdown, but on the other hand, the recovery funds which is being made available are heavily geared towards sustainability-linked projects. So that means that there's an increase in demand to provide that bridge between innovative companies, project developers, entrepreneurs, and those pools of funds. So that can really be grasped or grabbed by the scruff of the neck and dragged into the current date, right? So I think that could prove itself to be as a catalyst for the sector going forward. One thing that really stands out is the investment from the likes of pension funds and investment funds in the liquid markets. I mean, sustainable investment strategies in the equity and debt markets have seen significant inflow of capital throughout the year. The plunge in oil price certainly did its part to emphasize that the fossil fuel industry is not really where you want to invest if you want to invest for the future. But looking beyond the sector, the popular ESG metrics, the environmental, social, and governance, is a metric you measure companies you want to invest in on. It's now been employed widely in the investment worlds, and just to kind of eke out which companies are actually applying the best sustainable as a corporate way of going forward. And therein lies the environmental considerations, the social consideration, but also how they're governed. So that is really interesting, and those who are well governed are taking these aspects into account on a granular level throughout the organization, are seeing an uptick in capital inflow. So it's proven that it's worthwhile, but it's also a very popular buzzword, and it needs an awful lot of growing up, because there's a lot of greenwashing or ESG washing right now, where people are saying, yeah, we consider this and this and this. So that's a very interesting sector to watch, and I fear that a lot of listed companies around the world, but also here in Ireland, are not really seeing the importance of this. I've had conversations with C-suite level professionals about this in the larger companies here, and I think there's a disconnect between what investors require and subsequently what the end owners want. I mean, we looked at the divestment from fossil fuel from the Norwegian oil fund, which was built on oil, to pension funds and the likes of that. So yeah, right now, a glossy brochure with some numbers, great. 3 years time, 4 years time, it's going to require quite a bit more. And I think companies need to be taking taking themselves a little bit more serious in this respect and become thought leaders as opposed to followers. I think followers will always lag behind in equity value growth, but subsequently also it's a brand issue, right? So it's probably one of the strongest contributors to equity value growth for corporates right now in this environment. Just showcasing what you can do, because there's so much money being preferred into those categories as opposed to just trying to brush it over.
Why? Just one question on that. Why do you feel there is a disconnect from C-level suite people to what sustainable investors are looking for? Are they ignoring it, or is it just, that they just need to be educated?
I think let's not beat around the bush here. They have an awful lot to think about. They have an awful lot of responsibility, and just running a company without this stuff is tough as it is.
Yeah.
So I don't think they should be punished for it or talking down to. They're doing a great job, and they're there for a reason. But the comprehension of what the investment industry does and how capital flows actually has an outright effect on them, more so than what cost of capital for lending, for borrowing and such would be, and market growth. This has become a poignant point. So I think it will sink in, but I fear that the reason why it will sink in is because they're going to see the negative side of their inaction before they realize the importance of this.
Which probably leads into the next question I had, actually, Per. And I think when I was looking back earlier on in the year at the Global Economic Forum, they kind of talk about this whole global reset. And a lot of the companies that we're referring to at the moment essentially all operate within a global economy that's based on the Western consumption model. How does the sustainable future look in that kind of context, that we are all operating within this one consumption model that surely can't be sustained?
Well, I think to change consumption habits, consumerism, especially such a drastic one, which would be required in order to turn the tide on pollution and emissions and kind of draw back everything, I think it would probably prove to be difficult, as it's not a Western problem anymore; it's a global problem, and all this is so politicized, and there's so much populism go around that if you want to address it, I think it needs to be done in a way of how we treat the waste that comes with this cycle, and create efficiencies in the production cycle of these goods. So, I mean, so many countries have a fantastic economic growth over the last 50 years. I mean, the sheer number of people who makes up the middle class globally was estimated at 3.2 billion in 2016. And it was expected, I don't have the most recent figure, but it was from that point on, it was expected to have grown with around 140 to 170 million people per year. That should get us in and around 3.6 billion. That's an awful lot of people. When you reach a certain comfort, I mean, look at us in Western Europe. We all want a mobile phone. We all want to have nice clothes. We all want to have a car and a nice house. So consumption, we can look at it in the tiny way here in Ireland of how we do things. We're not going to move the dial as a country. But I think what we can do is be in that basin for change. We can show on a small scale how things can be done here, and that can then replicate out. So I think therein lies the notion that is much more viable to change the view of the byproduct, as I said before, from waste to a resource. And the trick there is to ensure that the method used is not only financially viable but profitable in order for it to really work and become the next way to deal with this, because it's a new sector, much like IT and the railroads or whatever. I mean, it has a boom and bust. It will have a boom and bust cycle. I think renewables has seen it. We're going to see this in innovation as such. But every new innovation has teething problems, and that has been that's a risk you take today if you invest in this sector, with some sectors. But at the same time, it could be the holy grail in terms of getting in and solving genuine problems.
And I suppose finally, because you have operated across Europe, you deal on kind of very much a European basis. How would you see Ireland in comparative to the rest of Europe when it comes to their approach to sustainability?
Okay, I'm going to be honest here. I think Ireland is significantly lagging in its approach to sustainability and renewable energy system adaptation. I mean, sure, there are excuses available en masse why this is the case, and sure, like other EU countries are lagging behind as well, even further in some cases. But it's just not an excuse. There is a significant silver lining to where Ireland stands today, though, and that has to be highlighted. So, having seen what can happen when new systems and solutions are implemented at large scales, there will be teething issues. There will be problems. We saw it in the massive negative energy prices in Germany on sunny and windy days, when all the solar and wind was producing so much the grid could not take it, and you were paid something in the hundreds of euros per kilowatt to not produce energy, which shouldn't be, right? Owing to the collapse of the renewable energy investment market in Spain, which happened because of legislation and combination of legislative fumbling and financial crisis coming in 2008. So that left billions of investment in limbo. But this means that the mistakes have been made. The notion of what works is there. So Ireland has actually got the playbook at its fingertips. With a sort of trial and error approach in adapting society to a sustainable model, Ireland stands to benefit greatly from picking and choosing the solution which works best. And they're all there to see. The information is there. People are willing to share. So with the cost of technology now required to do these things, I mean, is dropped significantly with solar, for example. It's the same price, same time as these panels have become more efficient. Ireland is in a position to roll out a super efficient setup at a much smaller scale than it was if it was attempted 10 to 20 years ago. So Ireland has everything to gain and can just piggyback off of everybody else's investments and mistakes to make sure that this is a functional and efficient system, and it can be rolled out quite quickly. So I just, in my heart and my soul, I just hope that politicians and business leaders alike see the opportunity which lies before them and grab it with both hands. I mean, these are very exciting times we live in, and genuine change can be achieved if we just put our minds to it. But it needs believers and skilled individuals to get this going, rather than just dwelling on in whatever you do for today. So anybody out there listening to this who wants to change in this sector, there's a huge demand for good people, fantastic people, and we're needed. It's not just for ourselves. It's not just for the short term. It's really creating genuine change that will matter.
It seems to be that you're very much at the forefront of it, and there is cause from what you've seen moving forward.
Absolutely. There's a lot of exciting things and small things happening here in Ireland, such as the recent solar tariff auction, which is great. Been waiting for that one for 10 years, but things are moving now. So there certainly is reasons to be hopeful, and simple solutions are coming up everywhere. People finding things that just they didn't know before about how CO2 is absorbed by rivers and at a rate 4 times higher than before in some circumstances. How certain parts of rock can be spread out. Rock sand can be spread out to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, just spreading out on fields. All this is out there. All this is happening right now. And whilst newspapers are so, and news media in general are so heavy on conveying the crisis and the negative effects, and it's headline stuff, right? Clickbait. There's much less reason for them to talk about that this can be solved. In part, I understand that people need to be mobilized, but we're doing that through people understand that it's important to recycle because we have the green bins. It doesn't move the dial at all that we're doing that, except for our understanding of the importance of thinking along these lines. So I think the notion is there. The universities are buying in. The innovators are out there, and money is certainly no shortage. So I think the biggest problem that we have to overcome in the next 5 to 10 years is linking innovation with capital and doing it in such a way that stakeholders are aware and understand how to drive this to the next level.
Brilliant. And I think that's a very, very good note to end this conversation on, because I think that in essence frames where we're at as in relation to our sustainable revolution and how we essentially need to move forward. So I think everybody listening today will agree that you've shared some phenomenal insights, Per, and really given some very strong opinions that I feel will only further shed light on this topic. And I think it's a topic that will never end. We're always going to be looking at how we can become more sustainable and and make this a better place that we're living in. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us today. And we look forward to speaking to you again in the near future.
Likewise, thank you so much for having me, Andrew and Mark. And yeah, I look forward to listening to the rest of your podcasts as they become available.
Brilliant, Per.
Perfect.
Thank
Thanks
you
again, Per.
Thank you. All the best.
Thanks for joining us on Conversations with Coopman. If you are looking to hire excellent talent or considering your next career move in front office, risk, compliance, or accounting, please reach out to a member of our specialist recruitment team. If you have any questions about the financial services market, feel free to leave a comment below and we will get back to you soon. And if you like this podcast episode, we'd greatly appreciate a video like, or even better, subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with our latest releases.